Hello and welcome to this second part, or the advanced part of painting the Black Powder Red Earth Scorch team. In the last video I showed you how to easily reach a good looking tabletop standard with loads of easy to learn and simply to follow techniques, and we already have a really nice looking miniature for the table that is or should be easy to paint. However, in this video I will show you how to upgrade that paint job even more to give it a slightly more realistic and grimdark look. With the exception of the Spirit Stone Red that we will need for the lenses, all the other colors aren't necessarily to be used from Games Workshop. We need an AntiShine matte varnish that can be from every brand, as well as the washes. What we'll need are toothpicks with small batches of foam for stippling and sponging. And here's a rough overview over all the paints that I will use. But as said before, you can use every brand, however you like it, or what you have at home. Here again is a look at what we had, or what we have after the last tutorial, and here you can see the upgraded version. We will add a little bit of wear and tear, a little bit more definition here and there, and also give the lenses a second go, along with a bit more dust and stuff like that. The grass isn't mandatory, but it's a nice addition. Let's first start with a Corvus Black, or another not quite black but super dark gray, and I focus here on all the, well, not all the recesses, but on those areas that are more in shadow, like the lower part of the legs and the area around the belt, as well as the bottom of the satchels and stuff like that, simply to give a little bit more definition to the light and dark parts, to up the contrast a little bit, so to say. Next we will use a light blue gray, in my case Fenrisian gray, thinned on the wet palette, and after that wiped on a paper towel to fortify that denim look, mainly on those parts that are in the light. So after we have deepened the shadows, we now work on adding a few highlights. In this case, some scratches, some wear and tear on the edges, and some general highlights. All this along with a few dots and scratches on the darker parts too. When you go a little more thin, you can add a kind of dusting with a more thin than wash consistency of the paint. The trick is here to start with not very much pigment on the brush and then build up the layers until the point where you like it. Stack it on scale. Green was the original color, and we want it in a similar consistency here, almost super translucent. You would call this not a shade but a glaze, and where our contrast, or the light blue gray, is too stark, too crazy, we'll tone that down a little bit. If you make a mistake here, you can always go back in with a light gray and then recover with a dark blue, something like that. Next we'll cover some areas of the skin with a mix of Corvus Black and Cadian Flesh. Again, any color of any range could be used here. Warm gray goes best along with a skin tone. You do not want to have it too cold. We work here on the arms especially to add a little bit more shadow, but this mix can be used to add stuff like hair or wasted bleached out tattoos or something like that. In any case, you can work with more dark gray or more skin tone, or add a lighter skin tone later. And of course you can use pure Cadian Flesh tone on top of those areas where you went too dark with the mix. Again, a bit of experimenting is always recommended here. Now with Steel Legion Drab and a real thinned down, always almost like a wash consistency, I go over all the satchels first to give them a light dusting. The trick is to have a color that's brighter than your leather parts or your pouches. With Rhinox Hide or a similarly warm dark brown, you can add a little bounce light onto the gun casings. That fell rather short, so now we go covering the lenses with the gemstone red of Games Workshop or from Citadel, and we want to put a huge blob of paint on the respected areas, as in the end this is a gloss varnish mixed with some translucent shiny pigments, and we want it to dry like a glass bulb, so to say. So the effect that we want in fact comes natural with that kind of paint. You can see it here. If you dab it and add to it, you will have that tiny lens effect. Here I'm using the old snakebite leather. I don't really know what the name of that is. It's a rather mid to light ochre color to wash almost all of the miniature with a light brown dusting. This is the same color that I use for the base, so principally you use always use the same colors that you use to dusting the base to dust the miniature. So both are have the same dirt. Simple like that. You can also go a bit lighter or a bit darker. You can mix different paints while they are still wet, but you have to have in mind that you do not really have much control when you do that, as the mix should be really wet and fast, and the possibility that all the areas mix in a new color that you do not really want is quite high, so it might be better to go layer after layer here. Now we'll cover the use of toothpicks. First, without foam attached, I use a K03rnl or any other thinned down paint, and I go with a brush over the toothpick to sprinkle tiny dots of paint onto the miniature. As always, recommend to try this on a piece of paper or something like that, so you get a grip on how hard you have to push and how much paint you need to have on the miniature. You should also be aware that it's best to do this when most of your paint is dry, not like I did here. The paint might mix. It's almost dry, but not overly much. Here we have a closer look at what it does. Don't overdo it here. Nevertheless, if you do, use a brush with water to wipe all the extra sprinkles away. Why I'm using K03rnl here, it dries rather glossy, so adds a little bit of wetness and contrast to those sprinkles, thus pronouncing them a little bit more and adding more interest on all the surfaces where I work, even if they are super dark. Here again is a close-up on what we have achieved here. If you would use a color that is ultra matte, you can or could work on the dark areas or on the glossy areas too. Down here on the arm we have added some brown tones to the skin color. And of course you can use brighter tones. I would recommend using those that you have used on the base too. The dilution can vary, so again, be experimental. Next we'll have a super soft dry brush using Dawnstone and a really big, or rather big, brush. I sometimes use Glaze here, but Glaze here is quite bright and it can add too much light on your miniature. However, before you go over the miniature with a dry brush, be absolutely sure that all parts are super dry. And of course I lied to you and I'm using Glaze here right now. If you do so too, or of course any other light gray, be absolutely sure that you get almost all of the pigment out of the brush by first going over a paper towel, and secondly go over the edge of your paint holder or some extra piece, or in this case over the base. The super grainy terrain usually or not only has enough texture to get out most of the gray paint, but it can also use it for contrast, so it doesn't hurt when the base is brighter. And with almost all the paint removed, I go over my main edges only, using a few brush strokes on each area to quickly accentuate all the edges. This also adds a slightly dusty texture over there, so it's a bit more smooth or natural, like a hard edge highlight would be, and we want that more realistic look here. If you have done the sprinkling right, you can also accentuate all the little sprinkles with that dry brushing technique. Now I'll cover all the dark glossy parts with AntiShine from army painter, you can use any matte varnish. Citadel has some, and also the Vallejo Mega colors are something I would recommend. You will see at the end of this video that one coat of the army painter AntiShine didn't quite work to remove all the shine here. So while we already have used brown washes on the base in the last video, I'm still not content with how it looks, so I'll simply add another layer in with various brown tones, starting from Rakarth Flash in this case, which is very bright, and going into a more yellow brown. This should be Snakebite Leather again, and I'm playing around a bit, and you can see how easily those paints mix if you play around with the brush, or you can also simply put just a dot of paint somewhere and leave it there so that it will pool there, or you can leave it to dry after every color, which has a similar, more layered effect, as the paint would not flow together like we're doing it wet and wet. We can also add a little dust or dusting onto the gun, simply with the same dilution that we use on the base. Give the helmet a little dab, and again those parts that are or were still too shiny. The one effect this super thin wash has, that the pigments dry really matte, or should dry really matte, and you have a kind of a same effect as a matte varnish would have. That's why I call it, or usually call it, a dusting wash. As long as our paint on the base is still wet, I take a toothpick with a bit of sponge attached to the top, in one case to get some extra paint off of the base, and also to have another way of dusting off the lower legs and equipment, or in this case the whole miniature. And this has the effect, in contrary to a brushed wash, that you have those little pools, and you get the foam or the sponge texture onto the miniature, and it's always irregular. And it doesn't matter how often you go over the miniature, as long as it's still wet, that texture or pattern will alter, will change, but will always look natural. The last step here is cleaning up the base trim. Again, I prefer a slightly glossy black here to again have a nice contrast to the more matte and dirty miniature. It just gives a nice cut that I personally prefer to the tabletop. Yeah, and here we go. This is the finished miniature. Here's another close-up that's hopefully not too choppy. You can see all the extra details, be it mud or dirt sprinkles or blood splatters, and hopefully you can see the shininess of the lenses of the sunglasses and stuff like that, which is best achieved with the paint that I recommended before, but yeah, if you have other ideas to do this, feel free to share with me. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, this series in all, and I hope you also pick up some of these fantastic miniatures and enjoy painting them, be it with my guide or with your own ideas. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Be excellent to each other.